President Biden speaks with Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping for the first time. We take a look at what Biden did in his first 3 weeks for U.S.-China policy. Mandatory vaccinations for citizens in one Chinese city, but authorities are keeping quiet about possible side effects. A new form of retaliation from Beijing. British television station BBC is banned from airing in China. And a Canadian visa application center in Beijing could be run by Chinese police, putting citizens' personal information at risk. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Biden spoke to Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Wednesday. They talked about China's unfair economic practices, the crackdown in Hong Kong, human rights abuses in Xinjiang, and assertive actions in the Indo-Pacific region, including toward Taiwan.
U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping for the first time since coming into office on Wednesday evening. Biden stressed human rights concerns and the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific, while Xi warned that a confrontation between the two nations would be a disaster. Xi also urged that the two sides should re-establish the means to avoid misjudgments, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry's account of the call. Biden emphasized what he called Beijing's coercive and unfair practices, including its crackdown in Hong Kong, reported human rights abuses in Xinjiang, and increasingly assertive actions in the region, including toward Taiwan, the White House said in a statement. But Xi maintained a hardline tone on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan, which he said were matters of sovereignty and territorial integrity. It was Xi's first call with a U.S. president since he spoke with former President Donald Trump last March. Chinese officials have expressed cautious optimism that bilateral relations will improve under Biden and urged Washington to meet Beijing halfway. But the Biden administration has made clear it will continue to maintain pressure on China, while also pledging a more multilateral approach. A senior Biden official said the administration will look at adding new targeted restrictions on certain sensitive tech exports to China, and there would be no quick moves to lift Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports.
It's been 3 weeks since Biden took office. What are his China policies so far? A China affairs expert gives an analysis.
Experts have been saying President Biden will continue Trump's tough stance on China.
We do think that Joe Biden and his administration will continue a tougher approach to China than
But one analyst says, judging from recent China policies, the new administration's specific methods are quite different. Biden has taken a hard line towards China's military activities in the South China Sea. That's through sending aircraft carriers and warships to sail through the ocean, sending the message to China that the U.S. does not recognize Beijing's claim to the territory. But on the other hand, the White House recently withdrew a Trump-era rule that require American schools to report their relationships with China's Confucius Institutes. Those are language and cultural classes held outside of China, sponsored by the Chinese regime. They've been accused of spreading pro-CCP propaganda and exporting censorship to U.S. campuses. The new administration also backed off from Trump's efforts to ban TikTok. The social media app is hugely popular among American teenagers, but is owned by a Chinese company. Lawmakers and experts have said the firm may collect sensitive data from American users and submit it to the CCP. President Biden also extended the deadline for American investors to stop buying stakes in Chinese companies with military ties. Former President Trump previously set the deadline for last month.
Biden's strategy, as we have seen in the 3 weeks since he took office, is to deal with the hard power of the Chinese regime and the sharp power of the regime separately.
These terms were coined by American diplomats. Hard power refers to military force and coercion. Soft power means using culture, ideals, and values to influence others. China affairs analyst Tang Jinyuan says the Chinese regime's sharp power is different from both of the above.
It is actually a comprehensive use of information warfare, public opinion warfare. It's to infiltrate the other side's economic, political, cultural, and scientific fields. The goal is to gain control over the fields and then influence the other country's policies or even achieve complete control.
He believes China actually relies more on Confucius Institute's TikTok and American investment to advance its conflict with the U.S. than through military means.
Those are the areas where they can gain practical benefits, because we know that the risk of a direct military conflict between the United States and China is extremely low. So the U.S. and China sending warships, etc., are more of a political declaration.
He said the previous administration has been trying to decouple with China in a number of fields, including the development of sensitive technology.
As long as you are connected in these areas, you can hardly avoid the CCP's use of various ways to take advantage of the openness of Western liberal and democratic societies to infiltrate and dismantle you, from within. So decoupling in these areas, in my opinion, is the most effective way.
But it remains to be seen whether it's likely to happen. A senior China policy official from the Biden administration said in a panel discussion that the U.S. and China should take small steps to form a workable relationship.
For both sides to stop, take a deep breath, perhaps step back a little bit, reflect, but there may be things on visas, on journalists, on consular outposts. There are a number of things that you could imagine that could be potentially helpful.
He could be referring to reversing some of Trump's policies. The policies include restricting visas for Chinese Communist Party members, expelling Chinese state media journalists, and closing Chinese consulate that allegedly served as spy outposts. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
The U.S. is set to keep giving CCP-affiliated funded U.S. schools relief aid after Democrats voted down an amendment that would have cut federal relief funds for those schools. NTD's Christina Kim has the details.
In a party-line vote, the Democrat-controlled Education and Labor Committee tossed Representative Elise Stefanik's amendment to Biden's pandemic relief bill. It would have denied schools federal money if they were tied to Chinese entities and communist affiliates. This essentially means that schools will still be given taxpayer money even if they partner with the Chinese Communist Party or CCP. This comes after Biden quietly nixed Trump's policy that would have required colleges to disclose ties to Confucius Institutes, CCP-funded school partnerships considered to be a part of Beijing's arm to promote communist propaganda. China analyst Gordon Chang says the U.S. is being overwhelmed.
I think hundreds of thousands of collectors of information that China has in our country. It's not just their Ministry of State Security agents. It's their tourists. It's their business people. It's their students who are interviewed when they go back to China. They collect information, 1,000 grains of sand approach.
Introducing the measure to the committee, Republican Representative Stefanik said, quote, "The Chinese Communist Party will do everything possible to steal our intellectual property and research, compromise our professors, and even recruit individuals on campus for espionage." In addition to this measure, Democrats and the Biden administration have indicated they want to cooperate with China on certain issues like climate change and the pandemic. Chang says this strategy won't work.
How can we cooperate with a government that means to overthrow us? It just doesn't seem to make sense. And the Communist Party has been very clear. They say that if you don't cooperate with us on everything, we're not going to cooperate on anything.
Chang lays out the strategy he believes the U.S. should take.
And I think the way that we should be approaching this is to cut all ties with China, because China uses every point of contact with the United States to undermine our society, overthrow our government.
Stefanik said higher education is valued for open thought and expression and being a place for innovation and learning. But the Chinese Communist Party sees these institutions as, quote, forums for communist brainwashing and censoring speech, and unfortunately, a marketplace for intellectual theft. She says Democrats are putting China first and America last. Christina Kim, NTD News.
A city in North China has been downgraded to a low-risk area regarding infection of the CCP virus. But lockdown measures haven't been loosened. That's as locals say they're enduring vaccine side effects that authorities won't report. NTD's Li Shanshan has more.
Nangong City in Hebei Province has been downgraded to a low-risk area for CCP virus infection. But authorities there are still carrying out measures designed for high-risk regions. People still aren't allowed to go out after being confined to their homes for more than a month. Vaccination has also been made mandatory for all citizens, except for those over 60. Some locals told us they noticed side effects after being vaccinated, But authorities failed to report the after effects. Nangong City resident Mr. Lin says he believes the fight against the pandemic is all about politics. The officials downgraded the city to a low-risk level because they don't want to be criticized by higher-level officials for failing to combat the virus. That's because too much criticism could cost them their jobs. To protect Mr. Lin's identity, we distorted his voice.
Now the risk level has been reduced to low, but it's still being handled as a high-risk area. All doors are still sealed up. They don't allow people to go out. When people go out, the police will arrest them, detain them.
Lin explains people there were forced to accept the vaccine.
People from 18 to 59 must be vaccinated. It's also the case for children above 3. If they don't get the vaccine, they won't be allowed to go to school. People will not be allowed to go to work either. The authorities have power. You have to obey them. Without the vaccination, you are not even allowed to go shopping. Everyone has a vaccination document that shows if you've been vaccinated.
Another resident said he and his classmate endured side effects after being vaccinated.
I had allergic reactions on my face after being vaccinated. My face was itchy, very itchy. My arm ached for the whole day. The next day, I did not dare to get the next dose. I was vaccinated along with my classmate. He got a very bad headache that evening.
None of the side effects have been reported by local media. Confirmed cases in Hubei province are still on the rise. Many highways in the province have been closed, while those traveling ahead of Lunar New Year celebrations have been blocked on highways. Reporting by Li Shanshan, NTD News.
The Chinese regime is sending more CCP virus vaccines to Central and Eastern Europe. But its vaccine diplomacy is also facing some challenges. NTD's Becky Zhou has the story.
Chinese Party Communist Chairman Xi Jinping is promising more vaccines to Central and Eastern European nations. Chinese companies already sent Serbia 1 million doses of Chinese-made CCP virus vaccines. Now Hungary is also working with Chinese companies to get its own supply.
So they basically weaponize the COVID-19 situation to promote its image globally. So they see this is a golden opportunity for the Chinese Communist Party to exert a bigger influence globally.
A major roadblock to the regime's vaccine diplomacy is that Chinese vaccines may not be as effective as Beijing claims. Outside of China, different countries found different efficacy rates in clinical trials. So far, Brazilian scientists found the lowest efficacy rate, a mere 50%. But Chinese company Sinovac says its vaccine is 91% effective. American vaccines have different delivery methods.
The vaccines the China made inactivated. And so this is a traditional way of making vaccine. In the United States, those are mRNA vaccines. So basically they're using a genetic code.
The Chinese regime is competing with the US, the UK, India, and Russia in vaccine development in order to boost its image worldwide. Despite Chinese vaccines' questionable efficacy rates, the Chinese regime is continuing its vaccine diplomacy and preparing to send more doses to other nations. Reporting by Becky Zhou, NTD News.
The Chinese regime's National Health Commission announced that by February 3rd, China had administered more than 30 million doses of vaccines. But authorities did not reveal whether there are people suffering from side effects or reinfection following their vaccination. Lockdowns have delayed hospital treatments for non-virus patients across China, leading to a mother's death. Her passing drove her son to quit the Communist Party. NTD's Gu Xiaohua has more.
Wang's mother was diagnosed with cancer in February last year. But at the time, their local hospital refused to admit her as a patient. That's because healthcare centers were refusing anyone who didn't have the CCP virus. To protect Wang's identity, we gave him a pseudonym and distorted his voice.
At that time, the hospital did not give non-virus treatments, saying that it was to cooperate with the authorities' pandemic prevention plans. The hospital found out it was cancer, but refused to give treatment and casually prescribed a few bottles of nutrition solution, glucose and the like.
Wang's mother didn't start chemotherapy until 3 months later in May. That's when the pandemic restrictions loosened and she was about to get treatment. She received chemotherapy sessions and had an operation in June. But by then, her cancer cells had spread and were no longer treatable. Wang's mother died months later in September at 63 years old. Wang said he and his father still have to pay over $10,000 in medical expenses for his mother. Their health insurance only covered a small part of the cost. After seeing what happened to his mother, Wang says he became disillusioned with China's communist system. It drove him to seek out information outside the CCP's censorship. Last July, he used a special software to bypass Beijing's internet firewall and found a website set up 16 years ago by our sister media, the Epoch Times. He used it to renounce his membership to the Communist Party and its affiliated organizations under a pseudonym. Close to 40 million Chinese people have since walked away from the Chinese regime.
The Chinese Communist Party led to my mother's death. If the CCP hadn't carried out the policy so rigidly and taken extreme measures, my mother would not have died within several months.
Wang said although he had heard about the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre and saw banners and flyers distributed by practitioners of the Falun Gong spiritual practice, he had always maintained an indifferent attitude. He says back then he didn't feel personally suppressed by the CCP, but his mother's loss changed his mind.
I thought it had nothing to do with me, whether the CCP was good or bad. I just had my simple life as a normal person, period. But through what happened to my mother, I was awakened. I now think the CCP's iron fist is unavoidable to everyone. I am extremely disappointed with the CCP.
He says his decision to renounce the communist system improved his outlook on life. Reporting by Gu Xiaohua, NTD News.
China's National Radio and Television Administration is barring British television station BBC World News from airing in China. The move comes a week after Britain's media regulator revoked Chinese state television's broadcast license. Beijing said an investigation found BBC World News' China-related reports had seriously violated regulations, noting that news should be truthful and fair. They added that BBC News had harmed China's national interests and undermined national unity, and that its application to air for another year would not be accepted. The accusation mainly refers to the BBC's coverage of Beijing's suppression of Uyghur Muslims in its Xinjiang region, as well as China's quashing news about the pandemic. English-language BBC World News is not included in most TV channel packages in China, but is available in some hotels and residencies. Two Reuters journalists in China said the channel had gone blank on their screens. A BBC spokesman said the broadcaster is disappointed in Beijing's decision. Britain's Foreign Minister Dominic Raab also responded on Thursday, saying, quote, China has some of the most severe restrictions on media and internet freedoms across the globe. This latest step will only damage China's reputation in the eyes of the world. 1 week ago, British media regulator Ofcom revoked China Global Television Networks, or CGTN's license to broadcast in the UK. That's after an investigation found the television is controlled by the Chinese Communist regime. The Canadian Visa Application Center in Beijing is reportedly being run by Chinese police. This has raised concerns that sensitive personal data collected by the center could end up in the hands of the Chinese regime. Canadian media The Globe and Mail found earlier this week the company that operates the Canadian Visa Application Center in Beijing is owned by the Beijing Municipal Public Security Bureau. The center collects visa applicants' fingerprints, photos, biographical information, and other personal data. The Globe and Mail report says some of the center employees are members of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. They are recruited from a school that trains the next generation of party elites. The police-owned Chinese company also provides services to visa centers of other countries, including the UK, Italy, Belgium, Ireland, and New Zealand. Beijing Shuangxiong is a subcontractor of VFS Global. That's the company that provides visa processing services to at least 83 countries around the globe for the Canadian government. VFS Global has also built close operational ties with Chinese authorities in other cities. Canada's visa office in Shanghai, for example, is 30% owned by the Shanghai Municipal Education Commission. A Chinese state-run company owns the majority of the Canadian Visa Center in the southern city of Guangzhou. In the northern city of Jinan, over 90% of the Visa Center's local subcontractor is owned by a member of the CCP's main political advisory body. VFS Global says its local operators don't have access to visa application data. But a former Canadian ambassador to China says it's best to assume there is no privacy for visa applications made in China. A cybersecurity expert also says by knowing what's going on in the visa center, Beijing has a better chance of getting its agents through. Canadian lawmakers are now calling on the government to stop its contract with the firm. India's army released a video of its disengagement process with Chinese troops on Thursday. That's hours after both sides agreed to pull back troops from border area in the western Himalayas. It's considered a breakthrough after a months-long standoff. Indian and Chinese army officials were seen shaking hands and sitting for talks. Tanks from both sides also withdrew from the border. The standoff began in April last year when India said Chinese troops had intruded on its side of the de facto border in the disputed Ladakh region. In June, 20 Indian soldiers were killed in a clash. China also suffered an unspecified number of casualties. Since then, the two countries have moved thousands of troops, tanks, and combat jets closer to the border. India and China haven't been able to agree on their over 2,000-mile-long border since the Sino-Indian War in 1962. The Year of the Ox is just around the corner. Tomorrow is the first day of the Lunar New Year. It's celebrated across much of Asia, including China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Asian folklore says people born in the Year of the Ox are reliable, patient, fair, and trustworthy, and often inspire confidence in others. We wish you a Happy New Year. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow. Hi, we're happy to announce that you can also catch us on cable TV now. Millions of households already choose us as one of their trusted news sources, and you can too. You can watch us in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, and many other cities as well. And if your system doesn't carry NTD yet, you can just give them a quick call and request NTD on your cable provider. Thank you for watching. See you next time.